Buju, wago shindigu, migisi indodame, minawa gazagasqua jimekag, indunjiba. I'd like to share a little bit today about some recent revelations I had in the middle of the pandemic as we went into the shutdowns and all of my kids were sent home, just watching how my kids learn. One of my sons, Evan, who was 13 when the pandemic started, 14 now, uh, is a kid who really loves animals. And our family dog, who lived a very long life, passed away quietly in his sleep right in the middle of the pandemic. And my son was having a tough time with the loss of our pet. And he was campaigning to get another replacement pet. And he suggested a hamster. And I remember having a little trepidation. You know, our dog had been a mad shedder. I was kind of looking forward to trimming the number of animals we have at our house. But I could feel his tender heart about that and eventually acquiesced, and we got a hamster. Took him to the pet store, and it was kind of hot at that point in time. And he said, "You know, Dad, it's hot out here. Why don't you just stay in the car where there's some air conditioning? Give me the money and I'll go get that hamster." So I agreed. And he, of course, I got played with all of this. He went into the pet store, came out with one cage and two hamsters. What could go wrong? At home, after a few days, he said, "You know, I've been doing some reading online about hamsters, and I guess they don't socialize that well. Could you loan me some money for a second cage?" And I agreed, and then learned just a few weeks later that the gestational period for hamsters is only 21 days, as my son called and said, Dad, I'm a grandpa. I've got 22 grandbabies in the hamster cage." And that was not the news I was hoping to hear. Then he had to go about trying to create cages and separate all of these hamsters as they got a little bit bigger, until one night we had escaped from Alcatraz, and somehow all of those hamsters got loose in my house. Ended up telling the kids to stay up and hunt for those hamsters, who are mainly nocturnal. And they captured many. We started trying to sell some, give them away. Found out that hamsters are actually cannibals, that they would eat one another when they were crowded in the same space. And that actually happened when one of the recipients of a couple of hamsters received them, only to watch one eat the other in front of the little child who was receiving these hamsters. It was complete chaos. Eventually, we recovered and found new homes for most of the hamsters. And although there is still one feral hamster at large in my house, and we continue to hunt for it. I haven't wanted to put out kill traps because I don't want to traumatize the kids. And the other primary hamster, which is my son's pet, remains in his room, well cared for. I asked my son, if his love of animals could be attended to in another way. And he agreed. And so I got him a bag of birdseed and just kind of watched what would happen as he started to go outside. He would put a hat on that had a little brim, and he'd put some birdseed around that hat. And he'd put a little bit in each of his hands, and he would just go stand out there and wait. And I thought, there's no way that this would ever work, that wild animals and birds would approach him. But it did work. And pretty soon they started to come in. There were some chickadees and some other birds that would come and eat out of his hands or off the brim of his hat. Chipmunks would come up close. And he started asking me questions. And I honestly didn't have all the answers about bird taxonomy and everything else. Although I did have a copy of the Field Guide to the Birds, which I supplied to him, and he had access to the internet. And so he started doing all of this research. And pretty soon, the kid was like Dr. Doolittle. He would he had done this every day, regularly, to the point where he could go outside with no bird seed whatsoever, put his hands out, and birds would come, and they would land in his hands, on his shoulder, on his head. Um, chipmunks and squirrels would approach him, things like that. It was kind of cool to watch. And then I said, "Well, son, I was sitting with him in the kitchen one day and I said, why don't you tell me what you've been learning here?" And he said, "Dad, there's so many different kinds of birds. They're all different and they act different. So this one right here is a chickadee. Everybody knows what a chickadee is, but these other ones over here that look like chickadees, they're not. They're actually called redpolls and they got a little different marking. We have different kinds of waxwings. So this one's called a cedar waxwing. This is a Bohemian waxwing. See how they're colored differently? And you'll notice that the chickadees and nuthatches are the least shy of the birds when they come in to see me. But things like a blue jay, which is a really common bird, is actually much more standoffish, except for that one. His name's Jerry. And he had all this knowledge about birds, what they were colored like, the difference between males and females. And it was just amazing to me to see how much he had taught himself. And I think all too often when we try to orchestrate a professional learning experience for children, we forget the importance of teaching them about what they are interested in. We have all these ideas about what we as adults think they should learn and know, but they are often disengaged from that kind of content. Finding the things that excite them, that are engaging for them, that can transport them into the quest for knowledge, pay such huge dividends. I think even with the crazy hamster experience, he was learning experientially through natural consequences, about another whole species of creatures and how they interact with one another, as well as good common sense for somebody who wants to take care of pets. And so, in watching what my son learned kind of organically from these kind of simple little kid type experiences, I was reminded of the importance of speaking to children and really to all of us in our own cultural languages, in our own learning languages, to let children make mistakes and learn from them, to let them experiment and explore and be curious. And to this day, I think my son remains the most knowledgeable person in our house about birds and rodents through his own lived experiences. Thanks for tuning in today. Miigwech. Thanks for watching today. I'm Anton Treuer. Let's keep in touch. I'm active on social media, and my website has lots of information on my books, speaking engagements, free Ojibwe language resources, resources for teachers, and more. Miigwech.